There's been a meme going around, and I want to talk about it. Why? Because it's just wrong. Let's get into things. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to enemieswithinthechurch.com right now to view the documentary if you haven't already. You can also go to EWTCnews.com, again, EWTCnews.com, to view the continued projects of Enemies Within the Church, which include this podcast here. Now, on the note of the podcast, if you want to support the podcast, I'm not talking about the entirety of Enemies Within the Church. Please still support the entire project. But if you want the podcast to continue, there is a new link. Go check it out in the description. Is for a Patreon for the podcast. Now, I want to be very clear about what this is. It's for me to continue the podcast. Enemies Within the Church relies on the sales of the movie, relies on individual donations to keep moving forward. We have slowed down when it comes to sales. That's not surprising. The film's been out for a while. Right at the same time, we're trying to kick up some other projects. It cannot divert funds to the podcast. So if the podcast has been valuable to you and you want to see the podcast continue, please consider donating to that Patreon to continue the podcast. Again, that goes to me specifically for the work of continuing the podcast. Now, let's get into the episode. What are we talking about? So as I said, there's a meme that it makes the rounds relatively frequently. I mean, to me at least, I see it every few months. This meme pops up. So, let's look at it because we're going to be talking about this because I already made the statement. I think it's just wrong. And I'd go further than just wrong. It is a secular lie. Ooh. That's going to be an interesting thing. So what does this mean? At the top, which if you watch only on video, yeah, it's on the screen. I understand you can see it. Many people listen to this as a audio podcast. So I'm going to describe it for you. At the top, we have some Roman military figures, and it says, hard times create strong men. Next, it shows Rome in its glory. Strong men create good times. Then it shows the excess of Rome, and it says good times create weak men. The bottom, the fall of Rome. Weak men create hard times. So hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Now you might look at this and might feel intuitive. I think that's a lot of why people gravitate towards it, especially Christians. That's where I see it spread the most, not exclusively, but the most often is among Christians. Now, I find it fascinating, even in the fact that it's showing the rise and fall of Rome, because there's some historical mistakes with that, but that's a whole different concept, a whole different conversation. Because there was not these 4 distinct periods. That's all I'm going to say on that. But it feels intuitive. It feels that strong men go out and they conquer, they build, they create, and then that good times, that excess, then weakens men, and then they create hard times. And then the idea of this meme is essentially that it becomes a cycle. Now, I will agree with parts of that. There is a cycle. But is it true that hard times create strong men, and then strong men create good times? Well, I mean, for one, would you call Genghis Khan a strong man or a weak man? Did he create good times or did he create hard times? Well, I think the answer is clear. He's, at least by some definition, he's a strong man, was a strong man. And he created very, very hard times. He created a lot of death, a lot of destruction. He wasn't much of a builder. And it shows in the inability of his empire to last. Was Stalin, Joseph Stalin, was he a strong man or a weak man? Did he create good times or did he create hard times? Well, I think he was a very strong man. And he created very, very hard times, extremely hard times. And you could go down a list. I mean, every dictator could be considered I shouldn't say every, there's always an exception, but dictators are generally strong men. In fact, the meme itself harkens to dictators, harkens to the strong men of Rome, the Caesars, and that they created good times. Did they? Does a tyrant ever create good times, at least in any sort of lasting capacity? Or do they create a good time for generally a very small audience? I mean, mention Joseph Stalin. The people that were close to him in his inner circle, until he decided he didn't like them, they saw a lot of benefit. They would call it good times. The peasants dying, either being sent to a gulag or being starved, or being sent off to fight in a war without a rifle, I think these men would say it was not good times. I think they'd say it was hard times. So right there's a bit of a crack in the meme. Now, I wouldn't simply be talking about this if there wasn't something larger to talk about. And what we really want to talk about is, why do societies crumble? Why do societies crumble? And in particular, let's put it into the context that people most care about. Why is our society crumbling? Now, there are easy answers. There are simple things you can put to, but I want to go further than that. But one thing I'll say about this meme is it really comes down to a major issue. What is strong and what is weak? What is strong and what is weak? So as we go on, keep that question in mind. Before we dive into the main thing I want to talk about, I want to bring up someone who argued for, quote, strong men, who would see many of the figures I mentioned as strong men. He called them supermen. Not Superman, supermen. And that was Friedrich Nietzsche. He argued that with the, quote, death of Christianity and the, quote, soft morals, notice there's already something you could probably be picking up from that description, but from the removal of the soft morals, the soft values of Christianity, that there needs to be a group of strong men, a group of supermen to rise up and impose their strong values on society, on the world, to replace those, quote, soft values of Christianity. What are the soft values? Well, things like mercy. And, well, I mean, just mention the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, grace. That's what he's talking about. He sees those as soft values. Things that need to be replaced. Replaced by what and by who? Well, it needs to be supermen to rise up with their hard values. Again, what do you mean by strong? What do you mean by weak? I think we can really demonstrate this, though. We can really see what's going on. We're going to look at something called Universe 25. If you've heard of Universe 25, a lot of thoughts are already sparked in your mind. If you've never heard of this is really fascinating. I want to put one more thought in your mind, something to think about, which is the dignity of work. Dignity of work, the value of work. Mankind was made for work. Work is not an enemy. Work is not an enemy. But let's talk about Universe 25. What in the world is Universe 25? In fact, what in the world is something called Universe 25? That's a strange name. Well, in 1968, a man named John Calhoun ran an experiment. This was his 25th similar experiment. This was the largest in scale and also the one that he was able to take to completion. The others had to be prematurely stopped. And in this experiment, he set up, he got 8 pairs, 8 mice, 4 pairs, 4 males and 4 females, handpicked for this experiment. They were given unlimited food, unlimited water, abundant nesting supplies, regularly cleaned out for fresh nesting supplies. There was room in this enclosure that he made for up to 4,000 or roughly 4,000 mice. They had, they had nesting boxes along the side. They had everything they could want. There was no predators, there was no threat, there was abundance, there was everything. They didn't have to worry about anything. They didn't have to work for anything. It was designed to be a mouse utopia. Mouse utopia. Well, 560 days in, that 8 mice had climbed up to a total of right about 2,200 mice. Okay, so we're basically halfway there. But he had already, by that time, noticed a lot of problems cropping up. The population growth rate had significantly slowed down, but there were other much larger issues starting to develop. We saw things like increased losses of pregnancy and abandonment of babies once they were born. So essentially, now it wasn't intentional necessarily, but spontaneous abortion, miscarriages. Though I have to be careful about that because there could be a degree of more intent in the mice, and for the sake of this, we're going to say that there was an intent to lose the babies because you have everything. How do you have increased miscarriages when you have everything? And then when the babies that are born are getting abandoned, infanticide. But beyond that, you had male mice starting to form groups and starting to form gangs, rival gangs, and they'd go around and they'd fight each other. Fight each other for what? They were creating conflict. There was no struggle. There was no conflict. There was no work. There was nothing to do. So they created their own. But beyond that, male mice. It's funny how these things always start with the male mice, start with men. But the male mice began to just mate indiscriminately with everything. Males, females, didn't matter. And again, it was more than simply just. It was more than just simply mating. It was often violent. It was aberrant. It was breaking the norms, even just within patterns of when they mate. Everything about it was off. So we see extreme sexual deviancy. And this all led to an even more rapid decline in birth rates. Social bonds breaking down. Their society was dying, just absolutely rotting and crumbling. Then there was the rise of the, quote, beautiful ones, as Dr. Calhoun named them. It was a group of mice that secluded themselves from all the others. They'd even post guards to block other mice from joining them. They'd seclude themselves, and they'd do nothing. There was zero mating among them. There was zero. They wouldn't even fight other mice. They were completely isolated, and all they would do is groom themselves. And whereas the other mice had often scars from fighting, were just unkempt, these ones were clean, pristine. I believe. Now, I haven't read the details, as in like the full long notes of everything, because you can read his entire findings and the entire thing hundreds of pages, not just dozens of pages. Um, but I believe he even mentioned that if a mouse did for some reason get a blemish, that they were removed from the beautiful ones. Fascinating, fascinating things. But this spiraled into a point where there was 0 births. 0. 100% birth rate dropped to absolute 0. Because even the non-beautiful ones, they weren't mating, and on the very rare occasions they would, if they would. I mean, it got to the point where just none of them were. There was never viable pregnancies anymore. 100% decline in birth rates. Still, there was no, quote, utopia. But even as the population began to fall rapidly, and even since it fell to numbers where previously the experiment had been flourishing, didn't change anything. Once the decline started, it was nonstop. It did not turn around. He even took some mice out and tried reintegrating them with a normal, healthy population of mice. No, those mice wouldn't integrate. Those mice would behave exactly the same way, even when integrated in a healthy society. It was a 100% collapse until finally, all the mice were dead. Every single one, 100% collapse. Growing from 8 to a peak of 2,200 down to 0. Full societal collapse, extinction. Now, Calhoun would continue his experiments, and he did find certain things, in particular, giving the mice purpose, giving them work that they could do, improved things, showed a marked improvement in things, but didn't fix the issues. But it's still interesting to note that. Now, this is an interesting thing. This is an interesting thing for us to note. And trust me, this relates to the meme. But it's an interesting thing for us to note as Christians as we try and build an understanding of why our society is collapsing. What are sort of the root things? There are a lot of insidious things going on. Enemies within the church, we like to point out Marxism creeping into the church. We like to, and society in general, and how that's affecting things. But there's some more fundamental things we need to understand. But in general, applying what that Universe 25 shows to humanity, to society, for us, I mean, it exposes a little bit of the problem with utopia. Whenever we reach for utopia as humans, it leads to collapse. Not glory, it leads to collapse. I mean, this is the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, God's the one that came in and smashed that attempt, but it seems to be a pattern. Of the higher heights that humanity achieves. Doesn't matter. It's going to result in a absolute decline of society. Is it the weak men creating that decline? What is a weak man? Where is it coming from? Well, the problem is it really does come down to what is your definition of strong and what is your definition of weak. Because I would call all the men we talked about weak men. Why are they weak? Because they trust in their own power. They trust in their own ability. They trust in their own strength. And the measure of strong is not men, because all men are weak. All men are weak next to the true measure of what strength is, and the true measure of strength is God. So when we trust in strong men to build a good time, we're going to find that all they're going to do is create evil times. We're not talking about bad times anymore. We're not talking about hard times. We're talking about evil times. Because let's be real, that's what happens. So when society goes out looking for strong men, they'll get them. They'll receive them. They'll get these strong men that they deserve. And those strong men are wicked, evil men. When Israel went looking for a strong king, like the other nations, what did they get? They got a wicked man. Yeah, he did some good things, but his true character was revealed in the end. His true character was revealed. This is why you can't put your trust in men. You can't put your trust in strong men. I mean, even the chosen king of Israel, man after God's own heart, a truly strong man because of what made him strong, because of his humility before the Lord. When he got off track with that, when he started relying on his power, he committed wicked acts. So it doesn't matter how strong your guy is. It doesn't matter how good he is. It doesn't matter how humble he is. Every man can be a weak man. Even a godly man can still be a weak man. In fact, he's always a weak man. The only strength is the strength of the Lord shining through him. And when he decides to deviate from that, so he thinks that he has some capability, he's going to get humbled, but it's going to cause damage in the process. So it's not about strong men creating good times. It's about godly men creating a godly society, and a godly society brings about good times. It's not about weak men, though they all are weak, but it's not about weak men. It's about wicked men, about sinful men, about men who rely on their own strength, and they create evil times. Boy, I want to turn this into a Bible study going through. We could go through Judges and go through Kings and Chronicles, but that's not what this is. We don't have enough time for that. That would be fun though, because we could really show that in action. But I also want to, I talked about work. People need meaningful work. A society, yes, it needs godly men, godly leaders, but it also needs meaningful work. Now we're going to start to transition a little bit to how to stop a decline like this, because the decline's inevitable. This is the direction that society will always go. This is this direction that society will always go. It's always going to go. And if you notice something, Universe 25 sounds a lot like a certain section of the Bible. Well, actually, several sections, but in particular, you might go, oh, wow, that sounds a lot like Romans 1. That sounds a lot like the decline depicted in Romans 1. And you can see it playing out in our society. You can see the disdain for life. You can see the violence rising in society. You can see the rise of sexual deviancy. You can see the rise of beautiful ones. I'd say that has a lot of, not a one-to-one correlation, but a lot of crossover with the transgender movement. Particularly on the quote drag queen side. Yeah. You see it there. Men abandoning everything that they should be going for in life. Not even just talking about marriage and women. I'm just talking about fully going against everything and retreating to just trying to make themselves beautiful ones. Now, they're not achieving on that, but it's just some parallels. Now, there's a lot of other parallels we can draw there. Again, specifically with the beautiful ones. But let's keep moving on. Because how do we stop this decline? If it's going to come, then how do we change it? Well, again, you got to give people meaningful work. Now, there's two components of that. It's the work component and the meaningful component. Because without both aspects of that, you're going to run into a problem. This is something that both the Nazis and the Soviets found. The Nazis found that, when they weren't just killing people in the camps, but they found one of the problems in the camps was just the decline of the people in them. And they found one of the ways to combat that was to give them work. Now, they also found that it couldn't just be meaningless work. As one example, they would have them, the prisoners, go out, dig a hole, and the next day they'd fill in the hole and then dig another hole. They found that work made a difference, and that did make a difference for a bit, but then the meaningless of it counteracted any positive benefit. And again, the Soviets found this. Now, they found it to also be a much of a benefit because they built a lot of things using gulag labor. Then you wonder why there was some quality issues. But it really is. Mankind needs not just work, but meaningful work. This is one of the ways to slow down that decline. We were made for work. Again, meaningful work. And having to work is not a result of the fall. It predates the fall. God in Genesis 2:15 said, "Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden." What? To cultivate it and keep it. We were designed with work in mind, designed with meaningful work that satisfies our God-given impulse and drive to work, to cultivate, to accomplish. But again, it has to be meaningful work. And when meaningful work is replaced with meaningless work in a simple pursuit of more luxury, it leads to moral decline. Now, I stressed several words in that, and we're going to talk about why, but this is the one major flaw, at least the thing to keep in mind in a fallen world with capitalism. Its unlimited upward mobility, its biggest benefit, also leads to its biggest drawback, which is that unlimited mobility, unchecked, will lead to a Universe 25 situation. Does this mean capitalism is bad? No, not even close. It's leagues better than the alternatives, especially things like socialism. I mean, you want to talk about removing the dignity of work. You want to talk about creating meaningless work. Oh boy, well, there's your system. But it does mean that the weakness of capitalism in a fallen world needs to be understood and accounted for. The fact that it's going to create upward mobility, it's going to raise people out of poverty, it's going to create wealth, it's going to elevate the economic situation of a society, also leads to a state where that society starts to become decadent. That society starts to have time that it didn't previously have and starts to explore things that it shouldn't be exploring. And starts to lose focus on what really matters and starts to focus on other things. It loses sight of God and focuses on man. It loses sight of work to accomplish something and focuses in on personal pleasure. It replaces with money is not a bad thing. Luxury is not a bad thing. Collecting wealth is not a bad thing. But it replaces meaningful work with a meaningless pursuit of simply gaining more luxury, simply gaining more money, simply gaining more without accomplishing anything in the process. It's, as an example, it's a doctor. Well, let's do this. It'll be an experiment. You have two doctors. You know nothing about them. You know that you need some medical attention. You have to choose one of these two doctors. You only know one thing about each of them. The first doctor, you know that he said, I went into the medical field, I became a doctor because it pays good money. The other one said, I went into the medical profession because I want to care for people. Which of those two are you going to choose? You know nothing else. That's the only thing you know. Are you going to choose the one that said, I went into this because it makes good money, or are you going to choose the one that said, this is meaningful work and I'm going to put myself into it? You're going to go with the one that sees the work as meaningful. The other one, though you wouldn't normally describe it this way, the other one, he thinks the work is meaningless. It doesn't matter if he assigns value to it. It doesn't matter if he puts anything else on it. He's put his accruing of wealth above the meaningful nature of the work. That's the doctor, that's the man that's going to be unsatisfied with life, that's going to have a midlife crisis, that's going to pursue all sorts of other things, that's going to end up divorced, that's going to end up depressed, that's going to end up in all these other places. Why? Because his work is meaningless. And he can't overcome that, even when he goes, well, I'm helping people. But he's not in a career in a field where what he's doing is something that he's actually good at in a true sense. Maybe he can do a good job. Maybe he can tell you that he was graduated top of his class. Okay, so why is it so meaningless? We need meaningful work. This is one of the problems with, the you have to go to college situation. No, go to trade school. Holy moly. I mean, you want to go find a good job, go to trade school. Become an entrepreneur. Find work that you are good at, you have the skills for, that you can learn the skills for, and develop a passion around that, develop meaning around that work. Provide for your family, provide for your church, provide for others. Find meaning. Don't go off and go, I'm going to get this master's degree in insert made up field or overblown field or bloated field here. It's not just gender studies degrees. There are so many degrees that are either way overly specific, the field itself is completely ballooned and bloated, doesn't need to be as big as it is, whatever it is. On one note, watch out for those kind of bubbles, because that's probably a bad direction to move in. That's the field that's going to collapse because it's oversaturated. Find meaningful work, and meaningful work does not mean, I'm doing something that I have a passion for. No, passion is something you choose. It really is. And it can be hard to choose that, but it really is something that you choose. It really comes down to your skills. Find your skills and apply them. Find where they can be applied, move in that direction. Create value and meaning out of that, about accomplishing something with your work. At the end of the day, you can go home and say, I did a good job. I didn't do an adequate job. I did a good job. I mean, for goodness sake, my dad's one of those guys that whatever he puts his mind to, he's going to be better than average at. Doesn't matter what it is, he's going to be better than average. Particularly if it comes to working with his hands. And he was a pipe fitter, doing work installing fire protection sprinkler systems in buildings. And he was good. He wasn't just good, he was great. He did jobs that it took multiple people to accomplish, and he would do it by himself. And that's not an exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. It's because he put value on his work. He put meaning into his work. And so he didn't want to just give them something. He wanted to do good work. He wanted to do great work. And it gave the work meaning. Now, there's more meaning. Beyond that, taking care of family. The guy would drive hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes more each way to a job each day. So you're talking 3, 4, 5 hours of driving each day. But the work had meaning. There was a reason to do it. And it wasn't simply just creating wealth. It wasn't simply gaining more luxury. It was to do a great job, to accomplish something, to be able to go by a building and say, I put the sprinklers in that building. More than that, to go by a building and say, that building caught fire. And the sprinkler system I put in that building stopped the fire. There's an elementary school back where my parents live. He can drive past that every it's out of the way, so he's not going to drive by it every day, but he can drive by that and go, my sprinklers stopped that elementary school from burning down. There's meaning in work. We need meaningful work. We do not have enough meaningful work in this society. We do not have enough meaningful work in the United States. We've exported so much of our meaningful work, and nowadays we create meaningless work. We create bureaucratic offices that with just pencil pushers that are not accomplishing anything, are almost there just to have a job, not from the employee's perspective, but from the business's perspective. Meaningless work. So many bizarre industries out there. Bizarre degrees getting into bizarre industries. We wonder why people are depressed. But that's just one of the things. Meaningful work is necessary and important. What else can be done? What else can be done? And again, meaningful work, that's one of the biggest things to understanding and counteracting the problem of capitalism. Again, capitalism is not a wrong thing. It's a good system. It just means in a fallen world with fallen men, we will always take it too far. We always take it to a point where we lose the plot. So no, that does not mean government needs to regulate things. That's not the solution. It means there needs to be a healthy society, a society that's taking care of itself, a society that's creating meaningful work. And what more? Well, society needs mature Christians. Not simply Christian morals in society. That's useful, but frankly, that means it's on the way out when it's just the morals. They'll be abandoned. They'll be abandoned in favor of supermen who will impose their strong values, their hard values. But it can't be nominal Christianity either. It can't be a weak, immature Christianity either. It needs to be, society needs a base of strong, mature Christians. They will act as a bulwark against the degradation that society is going to see. Now, one other aspect of the decline of society, it's always with density. I mean, that's one of the things that Calhoun's studies showed, Universe 25, others. He was investigating density primarily. And so you see these declines happen first in cities and then spread to the rural segments. Times past, it was really just a city problem. Nowadays, we're able to export that thanks to things like the internet. We're able to export that everywhere. There's no safe spot anymore. So you'd see a lot of, in history, you see a lot of revolutions happen in the city. The country never even knows. The countryside never even knows. They don't. Nothing changes until they go into the city and find that there's been some things changed when they try and trade. But we need a base of mature Christians in society, and particularly a healthy, growing base. What we also need, society also needs mature Christian leaders. Because why? All men outside of Christ are weak men. And when they're in Christ, their only strength is Christ's strength, not theirs. Weak men will always create evil times. If we don't have strong, mature Christian leaders, we're going to see weak men rise. We're going to see evil times created. Immature or nominal Christian leaders, they're only going to produce more immaturity and nominalism, which again, in turn, will breed compromised, godless men who will create evil times. It only flows in one direction. Mankind only moves in one direction on this. They will move downhill. The only way to go up the hill is with, hard work. And that work is not work that we can accomplish on our own. That is the work of Christ. That is the work of the Holy Spirit. That is the work of God through salvation, through his word, and beyond that, through his church. When it's healthy, when it's following his word, when it's actually true believers. It takes work all over the place. Only God can push things up the hill. That's why we need mature Christian leaders, and we need mature Christians in society. Something that my old mentor used to say, the freedoms that we were given in this country, or the freedoms that were acknowledged in this country at its founding, not given, but acknowledged, they can only be handled by a mature Christian society. And the second that mature Christian society is gone, it goes downhill, and you're going to lose all those freedoms. Liberty's gone. Liberty's dead. So really, I mean, if you want to change the meme, it's godly men. It's God creates good times. And in good times, men rebel against God. They seek their own. They forget their God. They forsake their first love. And they create evil times. I want to point out that none of this stops. None of this stops the decline of society. Selfish people will always rebel against God. And the reality is, every single one of us is selfish. Again, we already talked about David. If David's not immune, you're not immune. In fact, if David's not immune, you're doubly not immune. So what do? Do we just accept that we can put Band-Aids on it and it's not going to fix things? No. That's a ridiculous attitude. We know that looking into eternity's future, there's going to be a permanent solution for this, and that's going to be with Christ. Christ is going to establish a perfect society. Okay, so between that and now, what do? Well, we understand that all of these things we talked about don't stop that decline. They slow it down, but they don't stop it. This is one of the reasons for the American Revolution. Things had declined to a point where they went, whoa, okay. That's one of the problems. People flatten it down to taxes. In fact, it really wasn't taxes in the sense that it was specifically just the tax, it was the tyranny. It was the godlessness. A leader who had become a god unto himself. And so much more around that. They saw the issues and they went, okay, we've got to separate from this. So society is always going to be, until the end, society is always going to have instability in it. It's going to have a cycle of rises and falls. No matter what we do, we're not going to change that in a permanent sense. But we definitely want to work to trend things upwards and not just sit back and let things get worse, let things get abused, let things get even more problematic and destructive. No, we want to save people. We want to see people saved. We want to see them saved from wickedness now. We want to see them come to know Christ and saved for all eternity. And that only comes when Christians are willing to stand up and say, that little meme there is wrong. It's a secular, humanist way of thinking. They are looking for strong men. We serve a strong God. They serve tyrants. They will always create tyrants. We serve a king, a good king, a strong king, but a good king. So we're going to go out. We're going to preach the gospel. We're going to make disciples. We're going to see mature Christians built up. We're going to band together with mature Christians. We're going to vote for good leaders, godly leaders. We're going to see our society. We're going to see our society changed. And it's possible. There are more kinds of revolutions than violent civil wars. We've seen revolutions before. We saw a revolution in the ancient world, in Rome and beyond, a revolution of the gospel. That was a lot more work than simply just preaching the gospel. There's a lot that goes into that. But we've seen legitimate revivals of societies coming through a spiritual revival. Doesn't mean we stop voting. You know, a few weeks ago, months ago, had Dr. Phil Fernandez on, and one of the things he said about that was, we need more political activism, not less. But it's the gospel that's going to make the permanent changes. Those political changes aren't going to stick without a mature Christian society with which to stick it to. So we hold the line politically while we change things spiritually. And as we start to change things spiritually, we're able to push forward politically. They go hand in hand. Why? Because what makes a society good is what makes a society godly. What makes a society godly is, it's God. It's the gospel. It's God's word. It's making disciples. It's getting them into church. It's getting them grown up, established. It's getting them to follow God's word, to apply it, to not hide it away. Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm going to let it shine. Gosh, I love how often can pull in little songs like that and you realize, oh yeah, there's actually a point there. No more this radical pietism where you separate off your spiritual life from everything else. Connect the two as a good, responsible, mature Christian will, or else you're going to see very wicked times created. So yeah, we have a chance to change things, but we have to understand the problem. We have to understand how societies collapse. And I just found this fascinating. I get frustrated with things like that meme all the time. And I thought this was a useful opportunity to explore that a little bit. Explore that a little bit. And I thought Universe 25 was a fun way to examine a little bit. But you see the wickedness, the growth of it through that. And you can, again, you can compare it to Romans and you go, wow, this is a very, very similar decline. You can compare it to what we're seeing now in society and go, yeah, these three things are all lining up. What's the change? Well, Romans says that the problem is a spiritual problem. It requires a spiritual solution. Again, doesn't mean we pull back in other areas, but it means we got to pull out the big guns. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this gets you thinking a little bit on some of these topics. As I said, there is a Patreon for the podcast. Again, that is for me specifically to keep hosting the podcast, not have to pull back from that to focus on other things. But if the podcast has been useful to you, if it has been valuable, if you appreciate it, I would appreciate you considering donating to that Patreon. Right now, it is pretty sparse. I do need ideas of what kind of benefits would be useful and beneficial for you. What would you like? I want to, provide useful things, both just in the podcast in general, but that's kind of the model of how Patreon works. Again, tiers, things like that. So I want to hear from you on that. How do I earn your respect? How do I earn your donation? Again, this is all about keeping the podcast running. Not that it's necessarily going to stop, but might have to pull back from a little bit. And there might be less episodes. That might be change in how the episodes are. That could mean a whole lot of things. I definitely wouldn't be able to do the bigger things like the Press and Sprinkle series that we've been doing, which is coming back next week. Barring any sort of dramatic change that we really need to talk about with it, just something else happening in society. My goodness, been a lot of things recently, but barring any sort of dramatic thing, that's coming back next week. We're going to be talking about Preston's view of hell. Oh yeah, it's going to be interesting. But I hope this has been a useful resource for you. If it has, please go to enemieswithinthechurch.com, watch the documentary, give me feedback on things, consider following the links to EWTC News, to the Patreon, engage with it. Let me know what you're thinking. I like engaging with people. Oh my goodness, did I step into it a couple weeks ago with the episode on Gavin and Megan, and oh my goodness, did in particular people on Gavin's side not understand at all the point I was trying to make with that. That was frustrating, but I still wanted to engage with people. I still did, and I'm really willing to engage with people. So I want to hear your thoughts. Leave them in the comments wherever you're at. Give it this a rating, give it a like, give it those kind of things. If it's been useful, if it hasn't, let me know why. If you want to give a thumbs down on YouTube, let me know why. I don't know if you can give a thumbs down on Spotify, but I'm still willing to hear your comments there as well. But thank you for joining this episode of the Enemies Within the Church podcast. I've been your host, Kyle. Remember, don't go woke.